The Walker family. The Walkers should have been able to enjoy their Christmas with friends and family in 1959. But rather than taking pleasure in the holiday season, they ended up lamenting the death of their loved ones as a result of the deeds of one or many unnamed offenders. A ranch worker called Daniel Magliard went to pick up his colleague, 25-year-old Cliff Walker, early on December 20th, 1959 in Osprey, Florida. The two of them were going to go hog hunting that day. But as soon as Daniel's truck came up, he observed the house's peaceful silence and felt a surge of worry come over him. There was a problem. Cliff had two small children with his 24-year-old wife, Christine, a 1-year-old girl named Debbie, and a 3-year-old boy named Jimmy. Because of this, the family's home was often alive with activity, and they were frequently up early in the morning. Daniel exited his truck and made his way to the Walkers' front door. He knocked and got no response. Then, fearing for the family's safety, he broke through the screen door and entered the house. He discovered a scene of bloodshed. The first person he saw was Christine. She lay in the doorway of the living room. Her head had been shot through with a .22 caliber bullet. She had been sexually raped prior to her death, as law enforcement would later learn. Daniel noticed Cliff and Jimmy's bodies in the corner as he glanced around the space. They had each taken headshots. Daniel had seen enough. Debbie was nowhere to be found. After leaving the property, he dialed the local police, who came to discover Debbie, age 1, in the bathtub. After being shot, she drowned. It's been speculated that the reason the attacker drowned the young girl was that they ran out of ammunition and she didn't die from the gunshot wound right away. Osprey police officers had their hands full. After a day of doing errands, they were able to determine that Christine had arrived home first at 4 p.m., followed by Cliff and the kids at some point after that. It's been speculated that Christine knew the attacker and may have spoken with them before the attack because she had time to put the groceries away. Another piece of evidence was the fact that Christine had engaged in a fierce struggle with the offender while wearing her high heels, which were discovered covered in blood on the front porch. The missing things from the family's home were also discovered by the authorities. The marriage certificates of Cliff and Christine, together with Cliff's pocket knife and high school majorette costume. It was suggested that Christine was the real goal of the attack, and that the perpetrator was either in love with her or her ex-boyfriend, because all of these objects looked strange objects to steal. Police had a lot of suspicions, but they had little supporting data. They discovered one bloodied cowboy boot, which may or may not have belonged to the family, a fingerprint on the bathtub tap, and a cellophane strip from a cool cigarette wrapper. It's also mentioned that the offenders secured the front door after leaving. A total of 587 persons were at some point regarded as suspects. The suspect list included Cliff's violently inclined cousin Albert Walker, Daniel, who had discovered the family's dead, and a neighbor who had allegedly made attempts towards Christine. Curtis McCall, a man who was once Christine's partner, was also looked into. There were rumors circulating in the town about the couple having an affair. Moreover, even though McCall refuted the rumors, he was never completely ruled out because there was little evidence against him. Nevertheless, none of these candidates materialized, and the reason for the heinous murder of the Walker family remains a mystery. Emmett Monroe Spencer, a serial killer, confessed to being the murderer at some point after the killings, but this confession was later deemed unreliable due to Spencer's well-known history of pathological lying. It was thought that Spencer had concocted his confession based on articles about murders from the neighborhood newspapers and the crime books he enjoyed reading. The Walker family case then stalled for a number of years. Subsequently, in 2012, the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office started looking into connections between the case and Richard Hickok and Perry Smith, two convicted killers. The two were career criminals who were hanged in 1965 after being found guilty of the 1959 murders of 4 Clutter family members in Kansas. 1965 also saw the release of the well-known novel In Cold Blood, which included discussion of the Clutter family murders. Since Smith and Hickok had an alibi for the time of the executions, the author of the book rejected the notion that they were responsible for the Walker family slaughter. This account, however, is contradicted by documents and testimony from investigators in Florida and Kansas. As early as 1960, Smith and Hickok were suspected of being involved. The robbers booked into a motel 4 hours away from Osprey after fleeing to Florida in a stolen automobile 34 days before to the Walker murders. After that, on the morning of the Walker family killing, they checked out. They were apprehended in Las Vegas, Nevada, on December 30th, 1959. A 1960 polygraph exam seemed to exonerate the couple of any wrongdoing. But as we all know, polygraphs aren't really proof of anything and aren't even acceptable in court. Experts have also mentioned the infamously unreliable polygraph equipment from 1960. Investigators revealed their plans to obtain a warrant to exhume Smith and Hickok's bodies in order to collect DNA in December 2012. They were hoping it would match the semen sample that was collected from the crime scene belonging to the Walker. In 2013, it was declared that the body's DNA evidence was corrupted and could not be positively matched to the evidence found at the crime scene, despite the exhumation having finally taken place. The crime scene sample yielded only fragmentary DNA. Therefore, the evidence did not establish or refute the couple's involvement in the case. The two were still the most likely suspects in Walker's murder in spite of this setback. Witnesses not only saw the two at the scene of the killing, but when the guys were apprehended, a pocket knife that, like Cliff's, was discovered. According to some theories, when the two were in Florida, they knocked on the Walker family's door and offered to sell them the 1956 Chevy Bel Air that Cliff had been eyeing for purchase. Christine let the man inside. Some internet detectives, however, contend that considering the things that were later taken from the house, it appears more plausible that the family's brutal murder was more personal. Cliff's niece discovered the marriage certificate that was taken in the past few years, tucked away among other things that a family member had handed to her. It's unclear if officials ever checked into this anonymous family member. The Walker family massacre is still unsolved as of 2020. If you're fascinated by true crime and enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up to stay updated on all our latest content. Moving on to the next case. Malvina Crutz. Charles E. Crutz, then 48 years old, arrived home from work at approximately 5 p.m. on January 29, 1958. Living in a serene neighborhood on the north side of Indianapolis, he shared a 1.5-story house with his 41-year-old wife, Malvina, and his 10-year-old son, Charles Crutz Jr., who was mostly known by his nickname, Buddy. Nothing looked wrong with the house at first. Buddy had been home for almost an hour and a half already. He was seated in front of the television, lost in an episode of The Adventures of Wild Bill Hickok, which was his favorite program. Malvina, Charles's wife, had vanished from sight and sound. It was normal for her not to be around, because she was currently supervising repairs to the family home that had been damaged in a house fire the month prior. She frequently dashed off to run errands, meet with laborers, or complete paperwork. Buddy said to his father that he thought his mother was working his paper route when Charles questioned him about her whereabouts. Buddy's mother reportedly assured him not to worry about it, and that she would take care of it for him when he returned home for lunch earlier in the day. Until Buddy told his father that he didn't like the way his bedroom looked. This response seemed logical. He said something about his toys being all jumbled. Bewildered, Charles made the decision to clean up before looking further. However, a wave of unease overcame him as he entered the lavatory. Someone had drawn the shower curtain closed. Charles discovered his wife buried in water, lying on her side in the bathtub. As he pulled back the curtain, Malvina was staring at the tap. The overflow valve was fully filled in the tub, and her legs were bent at the knees. Someone had shut off the tap. Both the body and the water remained warm, as observed by Charles. Malvina had wounds on the side of her lips, bruises above the knee on her left leg, on her left eye, on her chin, and on each arm above the elbow. The white blouse belonging to the 41-year-old was torn in the back. Her underpants was rolled up to her knees, and her cardigan was ripped. She was wearing shoes at the time, and her trousers were discovered to be completely drenched on Buddy's bedroom floor. It was eventually established that Malvina had not been sexually abused in spite of her physical condition. The coroner thought she had been hit in the head or face before being submerged in water, despite the official cause of death being stated as drowning. Malvina was a pleasant and kind woman by all reports. She was hardly the kind of person one would anticipate dying violently. Friends referred to her as vibrant and energetic, while neighbors characterized her as kind and amiable. In addition to being a housewife and mother, she worked at the church and volunteered for the PDA. Police started piecing together the 41-year-old's day's events as soon as they got to the site. Her friend Mildred Warning visited earlier the afternoon with another acquaintance, Florence Kubert, to observe the remodeling work in progress. The two had called Malvina at about 12:45 p.m. to let her know they would be arriving, according to Mildred. But the sound of a strange male on the other end of the phone greeted them instead of the housewife's kind voice. It was not Charles, her spouse's voice. Thinking it was one of the laborers, Mildred wanted to talk to Malvina. When the man faltered, Mildred instructed the stranger to let Malvina know they would be there. Then she heard Malvina phone and say, quote, "I'll pick her up at 1:30. Nevertheless, according to a different version, Malvina stated, quote, "Tell her not to pick me up today." Still, Mildred and Florence showed up to the house an hour later. They watched a man flee Malvina's house, get into her car, and speed off as they approached. The two buddies were initially perplexed, but they quickly thought this was just a builder looking for supplies. This was not an uncommon occurrence. The women knocked on the front door and got no response, so they moved to the back door, which was ajar. The two waited inside for 20 minutes, but Malvina never appeared. They left Buddy with a new jacket and left her with a message. Upon questioning the two women about the person they had seen get into the automobile, the police were unable to identify or describe him. However, a 16-year-old neighbor asserted that the driver was a black man. At 12:10 p.m. on that particular day, Buddy returned home from school for lunch. When he got there, his meal was ready, and he saw that his mother's car was still in the garage. Around this time, a milkman making a delivery noticed the automobile there as well. Malvina called out to Buddy from the restroom as he was finishing his lunch, telling him that she would handle his paper routes. There is no proof that Buddy saw his mother in person, despite reports that he heard her. The next morning, Malvina's 1955 Buick hardtop, which was a two-tone white and gray vehicle, was found abandoned on 4926 North Meridian Street, 11 blocks away. The car keys were not inside the vehicle and could not be found, despite searching the vicinity. Unbelievably, the car was allegedly there since the morning of the 28th, the day before Malvina was discovered dead, according to several witnesses. The Crutz family residence yielded a few noteworthy items of evidence. Because expensive jewelry and valuables were still there, and Malvina's purse and cash were unharmed, the police ruled out robbery as a possible motive. However, they discovered 3 fingerprints during their examination of the house that did not belong to the family. They also found a pencil in Buddy's bedroom that had hair strands adhered to it. Here, too, were blood-stained pillows. Malvina's little wounds on her scalp and forehead are thought to have been made with a pencil. At first, the pencil in question looked like a good lead. The words, White County Rimk, Monticello, Indiana, were engraved on it, and Charles claimed to have never seen anything like it. The origin of the problem was identified as the Rural Electric Membership Corps, which had utilized and distributed thousands of identical pencils in their branches and offices. But they were also left in the office building's foyer, so anybody could have entered and taken one. This resulted in a dead end for the investigators. If any testing was done on the hair found with the pencil, the results have not been released to the public. Investigators speculated that Malvina had come to and started to fight off her attacker before drowning after finding more evidence, such as a blood-stained towel found behind the kitchen door and a chrome towel rack found in the bathroom sink. Because workers were coming and leaving from the property on a regular basis, law enforcement had a choice when it came to suspects. While other males were still being questioned by police, at least 4 workers were proven to have been working on the Crutz family home on the day that Malvina perished. Nevertheless, all 4 men were cleared after questioning. Nothing more appears to have come of the fact that one man in particular was said to be unable to account for his location at the time of the homicide. After questioning, a number of more suspects were let go. There may have been others, but none have been identified in the open. In January, a hitchhiker who was also an ex-convict from Alabama was picked up and interrogated, but he was soon set free. The 62-year-old man who was interviewed did not have prints that corresponded with the ex-convicts found in the Crutz family home. Investigations into local sex offenders resulted in the questioning of an unidentified woman in February 1958, who was later freed after passing a lie detector test. The number of dead ends the police were running into made them start to consider the possibility that Malvina had acquaintances that her friends and husband were unaware of. Charles, Malvina's spouse, was also at one point thought to be a suspect. It was discovered that the 41-year-old had filed for divorce on January 13th, stating, among other things, flagrant and willful neglect of conjugal obligations over a 10-year period and marital misbehavior. Malvina and Charles failed to show up for the restraining order hearing on the 17th, which resulted in the dismissal of the divorce lawsuit. Charles said that the two had made the decision to get back together. This was verified by Malvina's attorney. It seems that she had followed suit in the early 1950s, divorcing and then getting back together with her spouse. In relation to their prior failure to appear in court, the two were scheduled to appear in court on January 30th. Charles was able to give a plausible explanation for the events leading up to Malvina's death on January 29th. He worked as a sales manager for the Southern Transportation Company and spent the bulk of the day at his office. He did, however, leave for 3 hours to visit a friend, who verified his account along with the friend's landlord. However, Charles's alibi did not satisfy the detectives, who then requested that he take a polygraph exam. He consented, but he insisted that they wait until after Malvina's burial. James Mullen, one of the first police officers on the site, noticed a number of inconsistencies in Charles's testimony. The 48-year-old initially claimed to have entered by the front entrance, but he later claimed to have done it via the back. Furthermore, he disclosed to the police that although he had taken off his jewelry and watch when he got home, he hadn't changed his shirt when he discovered the body. James Mullen, though, saw that the shirt he was wearing seemed clean and new. Charles and his friend Charles Fleck both passed polygraph examinations on February 7th. Charles Kreutz was questioned for 4.5 hours, during which time it was said that he was helpful and eager to assist. Investigators were also tasked with looking into the odd anonymous phone calls that kept coming to Malvina's husband in the days after her death. A woman with a faint southern accent would frequently answer the phone at night and inquire, "Is this Mr. Kreutz?" And when Charles affirmed that it was, hang up. The man who had answered the phone in the afternoon on January 29th also had a faint southern accent, according to Mildred Warning. Because of this, the police speculated that the two might know one another and that the woman might be aware of the man's identity. They were concerned that the man they couldn't identify would act to quiet the woman. Still, this lead produced no further results. Lenroy Pinnock, a local painter, was summoned before the municipal court on February 24th in relation to Malvina Kreutz's death. When questioned, he allegedly gave a very disorganized account of the day and was unsure of dates. His polygraph revealed evidence of dishonesty. Nothing was discovered during the investigation of his home. The case was withdrawn on March 2nd. 4 years later, Pinnock was taken into custody in relation to the passing of Carol Jean Martin, his flatmate. He first blamed another man, but later claimed she had fallen after getting home intoxicated and starting a fight with him. He was found guilty of second-degree murder in 1963. He was questioned about Malvina once more, but he denied any connection and offered no new information. James Rogers, at 25 years old, turned himself up to the police on June 12, 1958, after he had committed multiple armed robberies and forged checks. Under interrogation, he asserted that Malvina's death was the result of his acquaintance, a painter on the Krutz farm. Later on, after being questioned by Indianapolis police, he altered his account and claimed that he was the one who was at fault. He related how he had invited Malvina home after they had met at a restaurant. He lost it there and gave her a fistful to the side of her head. After she passed out, he pulled her to the bathroom, got her in the tub, and turned on the cold water. Rogers said that he left Malvina, drove her car away, parked, and threw the keys into a neighboring empty lot when she didn't wake up. The keys were never found, even though the car was abandoned at the identical address Rogers provided. Researchers were enthusiastic about this discovery, but also cautious. A large portion of Rogers' knowledge was found in the press, and portions of his storyline just didn't add together. Rogers later admitted to lying after a police-administered polygraph test indicated that he was. He subsequently provided the name of the real offenders to the detectives, and after an investigation, this man was found not guilty. Rogers subsequently provided a number of names, all of which turned out to be false leads. Between 200 and 150 persons were interviewed in relation to Malvina Krutz's demise. Internet detectives have speculated that Charles might have been the one, and the man he'd seen earlier in the day was really his lover. This could explain Malvina's desire for a divorce. Another theory holds that one of the laborers was accountable, but the investigation was complicated by the sheer volume of laborers entering and leaving the property. The fact that the case changed hands multiple times and was once overseen by extremely inexperienced detectives was another factor that had a negative impact on the investigation. The idea that Buddy was to blame is the last theory that has been addressed in relation to Malvina's case. This is because during his hour and a half of home time, Buddy never went to the loo. Not that it mattered that he was the only one in his house, or that his room had blood-stained pillows or wet trousers. Nevertheless, given that Buddy was only 10 years old at the time, many have argued against this theory. He wouldn't be able to raise or move the body on his own. Therefore, it appeared likely that he would have gotten assistance from his father if he had anything to do with the attack on his mother. All of this is but conjecture, though, and the truth of Malvina Krutz's senseless death might never come to light. Her case is still unresolved to this day. Moving on to the next case. Vicki Johnson. On January 3, 1991, Seashore City Police arrived at Sabado Park, California, on a chilly morning. When they discovered 34-year-old Vicki Johnson's lifeless body spread out on the sandy playground, the sun had just begun to rise. It had ended horribly for Vicki. In the middle of the park, her mutilated body showed the agonizing marks of a horrific mutilation. A large amount of sand had obstructed her airways, causing her to be strangled and smothered. She was subjected to horrific torture, as evidenced by the bite marks the offender left all over her body. Her clothing was torn, and some of it had been burned, along with the top portion of her body. The scenario depicted a terrifying image of a woman going through unspeakable suffering. Her life was brutally taken in a way that was incomprehensible. Investigators were appalled by the attack's severity, and the town was left in a state of shock and terror. In the 1990s, Seaside City, California, gained an unfavorable image as a hostile neighborhood due to its widespread use of illegal substances and high crime rate that persisted until the early 2000s. The unfriendly character of the community was further enhanced by this specific case. This was an unusual episode amid the out-of-control gang warfare. Unlike many others impacted by the fighting, Vicki Johnson was not affiliated with any gangs. The body of Vicki Johnson was found lying in plain sight in the popular park. The murderer made no attempt to conceal the body. However, nobody had contacted the police. There were no eyewitnesses in the field. The community's terrifying culture of fear was brought to light by the quiet surrounding the crime scene. Back then, calling the police seemed like a really brave thing for a witness to do. Vicki Johnson had battled bravely for her life in spite of her severe injuries and agony. There was blood all over her flesh under her fingernails. It was not her blood, but the offender's. Recognizing the possible evidence, detectives took clippings of her fingernails in the hopes of finding crucial hints. Beneath her nails, a significant amount of alien DNA was found. However, when it was put through the 1990s crime database, nothing matched. Justice appeared elusive, and leads were few. In the icy shadow of doubt, the case vanished for more than 32 agonizing years. But in 2021, when Vicki Johnson's fingernail skin was tested for DNA at the California Department of Justice, a ray of hope appeared. The road to justice turned out to be very crooked. Handling cold cases comes with frustrating systemic obstacles, such as backlogs and inadequate staffing within the forensic system. But in 2023, 2 years later, the Justice Crime Laboratory discovered an important finding: a genetic match made to Frank Louis McClure. His information was entered into the National CODIS database, and he was once incarcerated. The connection to this DNA match gave the case additional momentum. Even though McClure's DNA connected him to the crime scene, Vicki's cause of death was still unknown. But McClure's past revealed a horrifying tale of brutality. Frank Louis McClure's criminal history dates back to 1990 and includes offenses like resisting arrest and causing serious bodily harm. This history was furthered in 1994 when the suspect violated probation by using a deadly weapon in a battery and fighting at home, earning a 4-year jail sentence. McClure was involved in domestic fighting and beating with a lethal weapon in the same year as the 1991 event. In particular, charges of domestic violence included the most common ones against him, which happened in 1990, the previously stated 1991 case, 1994, 1999, and 2011, to name a few. His relationship with Vicki Johnson was still not entirely clear, which left a crucial piece of the story missing. The reason behind the two's connection would remain a mystery until McClure, who was 77 years old, died in 2021 from natural causes. With his death, he would never have to answer for the crime. Police thought he died quietly in his beachside home, escaping punishment completely. The questioned DNA technology is not brand new. He might have been captured alive if this testing had been conducted 10 years earlier. He was dead by the time the authorities apprehended him. Frank Louis McClure was descended from a well-known family in the neighborhood. He was not praised for his character, though. Residents of the coast were taken aback by his link to the incident. Longtime Seaside resident Mark Vaughn spoke for everyone when he expressed amazement and sadness. Vaughn, who had gone to Fremont Junior High with Vicki, recalled her gentle disposition and the previously lovely ambience of her family. Vicki struggled with addiction in her last years, a heartbreaking battle that complicated her story. Vicki Johnson and McClure definitely had a chance of knowing one another. Their engagement in the use of illegal substances appears to be the main factor separating them. Since we don't know the complete scope of the suspect's connection and the suspect is deceased, the issue is more difficult. The inquiry is still ongoing, so there's still opportunity for a close associate of McClure to supply vital details. There is still hope that one of the people McClure confided in will come forward and tell the police the truth about what he did. In an appeal to the public, Seaside Police asked anyone with knowledge about unresolved cold cases in the region to come forward. They begged people to contact the department at 831-899-6748. Reaching a conclusion in a cold case is not the only goal. It is an essential step in averting catastrophes in the future. Local law enforcement establishes a powerful deterrent by solving these instances. If potential suspects learn that the local law enforcement agencies have a track record of effectively solving even the most serious crimes, they are sure to reconsider their activities. Orlando Johnson, a former NBA player, is the youngest of Vicki Johnson's 3 boys, and he continues to carry on her heritage. When his mother was taken from them, he was just a year old. We sincerely hope that her family will receive the much-needed closure as a result of this crucial revelation. Beverly Potts. Elizabeth and Robert Potts welcomed Beverly Rose Potts into the world on April 15, 1941 in Cleveland, Ohio. In 1951, the 4 of them shared a residence on Linnet Avenue. Her elder sister was named Anita. Beverly, who was 10 years old at the time, was regarded as a quiet, reserved, and responsible young lady. Despite her early age, she was a dependable babysitter, had a keen interest in the performing arts, and avoided social situations with strangers to the greatest extent possible since she was timid and afraid. Less than a quarter of a mile from where the girls resided, Halloran Park was the destination that Beverly rode her bike to with her friend and neighbor Patsy Swing on August 24, 1951, at approximately 7 o'clock in the evening. Every summer, the park hosted a show wagon, which featured children's performances. The two had been granted permission to attend. For the girls, this was a rare pleasure because the park was usually off-limits after dark. The area was frequently inhabited by vagrants, and the trees had a tendency to obstruct any light coming from the stars above and the streets below. The girls came home to drop off their bikes at 8 p.m., deciding that it would be much easier to navigate the park without them. Then, they went back to the park. After 45 minutes, Patsy Swing recommended to Beverly that they start their journey home, since Patsy had a curfew of 9 p.m. But Beverly could wait until after 9 to return home, so she chose to remain by herself in the park. Patsy walked away. When she last saw Beverly, she was observing the performance on stage with the crowd. The show ended at 9:30 p.m., and people started to leave the park. A 13-year-old child who was acquainted with Beverly observed her moving diagonally in a northeastern direction across the park, approximately 150 yards from the intersection of Linnet Avenue, West A100, and 17th Street. This made sense because the 10-year-old would be arriving at her front door in just a few minutes after taking the quickest route home. Beverly walked with her toes pointed outward, giving her a distinctive, quote, duck-like gait that allowed the boy to identify her. Witnesses reported seeing a girl who appeared to be Beverly close to a black 1937 Dodge that was idling at the intersection of West A100 and 17th Street. The girl was talking to two men who were inside the automobile. This meeting occurred between 8:30 and 9:30 p.m., according to witnesses. Throughout these sightings, the girl never got inside the car. It should be noted that Beverly was incredibly shy, especially with men, and would frequently run away rather than engage in conversation. If the girl was the soon-to-be missing 10-year-old, then it seems strange that she would stop and speak to two unknown guys in a car. It's possible that the girl wasn't Beverly at all, or that she knew the males. Beverly never made it back home. Her family started looking for her around 10 o'clock at night, but they were unsuccessful and called the police. After a thorough search, the authorities were unable to locate the missing girl. They canvassed the neighborhood and surrounding areas door to door in the days that followed her disappearance. They employed a plane to inspect open railway carriages, they investigated vacant parking lots, and they tracked suspicious autos. But all of these attempts were in vain. Numerous media outlets covered the story extensively, which resulted in thousands of tips pouring into the local police agencies. The family was exonerated of any and all responsibility for the disappearance, including Beverly's 22-year-old sister Anissa. Investigators concluded that Beverly appeared to have been abducted since she led a stable life, was content and well cared for, and had no obvious reason to flee. Her father's union offered a $1,000 reward, roughly $15,000 in today's dollars, shortly after she vanished. Considering the 10-year-old's aversion to strangers, rumors circulated that she had been tricked into a familiar person's house or vehicle under the pretense of a babysitting job, or a claim that they required assistance with errands or were prepared to take her home. This gave the impression that she had been snatched by a neighborhood resident. But the sole known search of any surrounding buildings was done in 1973 in the basement of what was then an auto shop. But no proof pertaining to Beverly's case was ever found. The 10-year-old went missing, and in the months and years that followed, no credible local suspect was found. Many speculated that Beverly might have been enticed away by an unidentified woman since, while she had been cautioned against unfamiliar men, she had not received the same warnings regarding women. This was one argument put forth. In the years since Beverly vanished, the case essentially became cold and leads became hard to come by. Yet there have been a number of suspects and admissions connected to her disappearance. A vagrant called Harvey Lee Rush claimed to have killed Beverly in 1955 after enticing her to a nearby bridge with candy. Rush gave this statement to Californian police authorities, but a year after her disappearance, in 1952, he claimed to have killed her, leaving a gap of 12 months. Rush said that he had lied only to get back to Cleveland after being extradited there. Two retired Cleveland detectives, James Fust and Robert Shanklin, came clean in 1980 about who the killer was. They say that in 1974 they were contacted by a man who said he had received a letter from his brother confessing to the crime. In 1966, his brother left Cleveland when he was accused of kidnapping two young girls. When authorities found and questioned the brother, he revealed that he had been living close to the park in 1951 and had a tendency of kidnapping young girls and assaulting them sexually. He said that although he had flashes of memory regarding a girl named Beverly, he didn't remember specifically kidnapping her. Since then, the investigators had been convinced of his culpability. Nevertheless, despite the letter that seemed to clear everything up, there was insufficient evidence to prosecute him in relation to Beverly's case. A former funfair employee from Ohio called William Henry Redmond was another person of interest in the disappearance of Beverly Potts. In 1988, Redmond was charged with the 1951 Pennsylvania murder of an 8-year-old girl. He boasted about having slain other young females while incarcerated. However, he steadfastly refused to provide an explanation when questioned about Beverly by the authorities. Redmond had a history of convictions for child abuse dating back to 1935, when he was just 13 years old, and he was in the neighborhood when he vanished. In the 1990s and 2000s, leads continued to come in on the case despite its age. A note claiming that her husband had killed Beverly and that she had seen him trying to dispose of the body in their furnace was discovered beneath the carpets of a Cleveland home in 1994. This letter, which was written in 1960, was discovered in a Midvale Avenue home. Real estate data were used to locate the letter's author, who was 83 years old when she was located in 1994. The woman acknowledged that the letter's allegations were untrue and that her spouse had already passed away. She had composed it as a dream of retaliation against her violent husband. Then, beginning in 2000, a writer called Brent Larkin of the local newspaper Cleveland Plain Dealer started getting letters about the case. The author claimed to be an elderly guy who, before he passed away, wished to confess to killing Beverly and abusing her sexually. On August 24, 2001, the 50th anniversary of Beverly's abduction, he promised to turn himself in, but he never did. He apologized once more in writing, saying he would never be able to keep his word after being placed in a nursing home. Out of the 4 letters that Brent Larkin received, 2 included information on the kidnapping and the murder. A letter claimed to contain a rare coin and a sealed brown parcel that Beverly had in her purse the night before she vanished. Brent was promised these things, but as of 2020, he hasn't gotten them. It was determined by authorities that these letters were penned by a single individual, most likely an elderly sick guy. They were never able to determine his identity, though. There are investigators who think these exchanges were real. An anonymous source revealed details on one of the case's suspects in August 2019. After reviewing the caller's information, the police said they needed more details and urged the person to get in touch with them again. Nevertheless, everything seemed to line up. The $25,100 Crime Stoppers reward has been increased to $15,000. Nearly 70 years later, the unsettling case of Beverly Potts continues to be explored and has served as the basis for numerous books and films. The sad and enigmatic case of Beverly Potts is still unresolved as of right now. Moving on to the next case. Audrey Herron. Ask her friends and family to characterize Audrey Herron, and you'll likely hear adjectives like vivacious, caring, and spunky. Audrey was a part-time nurse at the Columbia Green Long-Term Healthcare Facility, a nursing home in the Catskill hamlet. According to the staff and residents, Audrey was very well-liked. Audrey looked to be destined for the nursing profession, and her oldest daughter remembered how much Audrey loved her work in an interview with Crime Watch Daily. Work. About Audrey's life outside from her job, hardly much is known. At the age of 22, she gave birth to her first child, Sancha. She then married Jeff Herron, the son of a wealthy golf course owner, and the two of them had 2 more children, Quinn, a son, and Katie, a girl, 2 years later. The people Audrey's family and friends liked Jeff well overall. Sancha recalled that Jeff never showed her any different treatment and cared for her as if she were his own child, even though she was still under the care of her real father. Audrey went home for the night on August 29, 2002, after a bad evening at work, perhaps around 11 o'clock. The 31-year-old made her way back to her freehold home, which is roughly 12 to 15 miles from her place of employment, through rain and fog. CCTV footage, recovered in blurry form from Cumberland Farms, shows Audrey leaving the nursing home parking lot and driving west on State Route 23 in the Jefferson Heights neighborhood of Catskill. The vehicle was a black 1994 Jeep Grand Cherokee registered in New York with license plates X233UV. She anticipated to return to Freehold by this path. Sadly, Audrey's voyage is not captured on any additional CCTV, and she never made it home. Jeff called friends and family the next morning in an attempt to locate his missing wife, but no one had seen her. This fact alarmed him, so he called Audrey's stepmother, who worked at the New York State Police Division headquarters. Officers were sent right away to the family's residence and the 31-year-old's place of business. Authorities were led to believe by multiple hints that Audrey wasn't a fugitive who had chosen to go and establish a new life elsewhere. She had abandoned all 3 of her children, to start with. For the final month prior to Audrey's disappearance, her eldest daughter, Sonia, then 10 years old, had been vacationing in Florida with her maternal grandmother. The morning after her disappearance, the 31-year-old was scheduled to see a doctor and was expected to pick up Sancha. Family members said Audrey is a loving mother and don't think she would have moved out without her kids. She also never showed up for her visits with her doctor. If she had intended to go, it would have been strange for her to have made it. Law police used a helicopter and cadaver dogs to aid in the search after Audrey vanished. Officers investigated every building, path, and body of water within a 9-mile radius, as well as her home route and other detour routes she may have taken. The mother of 3 went missing, and she was never recovered. In relation to the case, over 1,000 leads were followed up on, but none of them materialized. Law enforcement was tipped off in 2018 that the 31-year-old's remains was interred on a nearby property. Nothing was discovered despite the fact that investigators used cadaver dogs to search the area on foot and emptied a nearby pond. Jeff, Audrey's spouse, has faced criticism for his actions after her abduction throughout the years. According to officers who spoke with True Crime Daily, Jeff was reasonably cooperative, but they would not go into additional detail. Although he voluntarily submitted to a polygraph test and permitted investigators to inspect the family home, his actions in other situations have drawn harsh criticism. Jeff reportedly declined to assist with the initial search when Audrey vanished. Additionally, he doesn't participate in the fundraisers that friends and relatives still organize to help them search for the mother of 3 more times. There are also unconfirmed allegations that his polygraph tests yielded inconclusive results. Furthermore, polygraph examinations are unreliable in determining the truth, as we have repeatedly stated on the channel. Interestingly, no one has ever been able to explain why Jeff would wish to make his wife vanish. By all accounts, the marriage seemed content, and neither of them appears to have had an affair. Jeff wouldn't have a financial incentive either, since he and his family were already well off. Sancier has expressed her opinion that Jeff avoids speaking with the public in order to keep the kids safe, and other family members have mentioned that he was upset after the kids vanished. However, a few of Audrey's friends have mentioned that they are leery of the father of 2. A local allegation that Audrey, 31, was kidnapped by Russian mob members is the source of another explanation in her case. This is due to the fact that the Heron family's golf course did, at one point, have a silent Russian partner. Local rumor had it that the family owed this unnamed Russian guy a huge amount of money. Thus, in order to make the family pay up, Audrey was kidnapped. Police looked into this idea and even stationed an officer at the family home in case they were the target of a ransom demand. However, the authorities eventually discovered no proof that this was the series of incidents that resulted in her disappearance. The most recent idea on Audrey's case holds that she was the victim of a straightforward accident and that her car and remains are waiting to be discovered someplace in a body of water. This is due to the fact that the region she was traveling in the night before she vanished was dimly lit and highly forested. As previously mentioned, Audrey's car lacked fog lights, and the weather was damp and misty. It's likely that the severe weather and low illumination caused her to get disoriented or visually impaired, and that's how her automobile ended up immersed in a body of water somewhere. Audrey was last seen alive 2 decades ago. Her phone has not been used, her bank account has not been accessed, and her credit cards have not been used in the years since she vanished. Investigators observed that they were unable to connect when they tried to ping her phone. Now that they are now adults, Audrey's daughters Sonia and Katie have both chosen to become nurses. When Sonia talks about her mother, she smiles and recalls their fun times together, including going to dinner and getting manicures, as well as playing video games. Investigators claim that while there are a number of people of interest in the investigation, their identities have never been made public. Jeff Herron has never, as far as we are aware, been identified as a suspect or person of interest. Since Audrey's car has never been found, there may have been foul play in her case. Audrey Mae Herron, age 31, was last seen leaving the Columbia Green long-term care facility for her home in Freehold on August 29, 2002, at approximately 11 p.m. Notably, sources indicate that she was last seen in Cairo, New York. According to the Charlie Project, Audrey was wearing a yellow gold necklace, a dark green medical scrub set, a blue turtleneck top, and a white metal face watch with a white leather band when she vanished. She is described as a white woman with hazel eyes, dark blonde to light brown hair, and a scar that covers part of her right thumb. On the inside of her right knee, she also has a mole. Standing at 5 feet tall and weighing approximately a pound 105, she is a small individual. She is known to smoke cigarettes and may wear spectacles. Turk is her maiden name. She will be 51 years old if she survives. Mary McLaughlin. After enjoying a pleasant evening of dominoes, Mary McLaughlin's daughter last saw her walking down the street to her apartment. Nothing appeared to be wrong. She did not even consider the possibility that she might not see her mother in the near future. But that's not the case at all. The murder of Mary McLaughlin remained unsolved for 35 years until the authorities were able to identify the victim. However, there remained an issue even then. When he was incarcerated at the time, how could the offender be the one they were searching for? In Glasgow, Scotland, on September 26, 1984, Mary McLaughlin, then 8 years old, was spending the evening at her neighborhood pub. She and one of her daughters were playing dominoes. Mary came from a huge extended family and was adored by everyone. She was the grandma of 26 grandkids and the mother of 11 children. After their evening activities concluded, Catherine, Mary's daughter, strolled to the bus station and took a ride home. Mary made a quick stop at the corner store on her way back to her apartment. She stopped to get a pack of smokes and carried on. We are aware that she arrived home that evening, but she was not alone herself. When Martin, Mary's son, returned for his weekly visit 6 days later, he discovered the door was locked. After a few knocks, his mother did not answer. Martin attempted to obtain an extra key from her homeowner as her concerns grew. Martin believed that breaking down the door was his only option after realizing that this was not feasible. A putrid smell greeted him as it swung open. Although Mary was still in bed, it was obvious that she had died several days before. Her dentures were on the ground next to her, and she had her dressing gown on backwards. The reason was obvious. She had a double knotted rope from her dressing gown wrapped tightly around her neck. Subsequent investigation revealed that Mary was murdered the night she came home from the tavern. Martin will never forget that moment when he saw his mother. Martin remarked, "It scared the living daylights out of me and has tormented me ever since." According to a forensic analysis, the offender had left DNA behind. But at the time, technology was not developed enough to examine a sample that small. Fortunately, until the appropriate moment, which was a long time away, the samples were preserved. In addition to the verified sighting of Mary during her cigarette purchase, another witness came forward to report what they saw to the authorities. Mary was observed barefoot and clutching her shoes as she strolled past the store. She had been wearing heels for the day, so it was probably going to help her feet hurt. The police prayed that someone would come forward with information that would lead to the case's resolution. They received hundreds of statements and pursued every clue they could find, but they were unsuccessful. She was being followed by a male, according to the man who last saw her tending to her shoes. He acknowledged that he was constantly behind Mary when she left when questioned about it throughout the trial. The police thought that a predator was out there in Glasgow and may attack again at any time. At the time, all they could do was make sure the evidence gathered that day was securely maintained until the moment when it would help solve this case. Not until 2008, a full 24 years later, were those DNA samples sent to additional testing. Regretfully, the forensic experts were still unable to obtain a sufficient profile of the offender. The evidence was hidden once more. Then, in 2014, the Scottish Crime Campus welcomed the opening of a brand new DNA profiling facility. This meant that the scientists using this new method could detect 24 markers from a DNA sample, as opposed to the prior 11 markers that could be identified from a sample. But in reality, what did this mean? Samples that were previously too little to undergo any meaningful, conclusive testing might now be profiled much more accurately. In the hopes that this second round of testing will identify the culprit, the Mary McLaughlin case's evidence was sent to the lab in 2019. They concentrated especially on the dressing gown cord, which was the weapon used to end her life. They swabbed that untouched surface, untangling the rope and carefully loosening one of the knots that remained. That section of the fabric had not been touched in 35 years. The scientists had the best opportunity of gaining a significant profile because of this. Step 1 was accomplished. By assembling a robust DNA profile, the team was able to compare it to the Scottish database. As soon as they did, the match quickly returned. They were aware of the person who killed Mary McLaughlin that evening. Graham McGill, 59, was a man well known to the authorities. Investigators could begin their investigation into McGill now that they had a name. Soon afterward, they discovered an intriguing fact. McGill was incarcerated when the event occurred. However, how is that possible? It came found that on September 26th, the night Mary was targeted, he was on temporary release even though he was officially serving a prison sentence at the time. Temporary releases are permitted for several reasons, mostly to enable deemed inmates to obtain necessary services before being released, such as housing or employment interviews. Family matters are also relevant. We all know what happened after McGill, who was out on an unsupervised parole that evening, saw Mary walking home. During the 1984 investigation, McGill had not been considered a suspect or a person of interest. He hadn't even said his name once. After receiving the verified DNA results, the investigators took many months to review the previous casework. In addition to the DNA results, they needed to make sure they had enough proof to prosecute McGill for what he had done to Mary. Graham McGill was then taken into custody and charged on December 4, 2019, in relation to Mary McLaughlin's murder. His former wife was one of the witnesses called to testify when McGill was put on trial. She informed the jurors that McGill had admitted to killing a woman in 1988. He provided her with information about the crime that matched Mary's situation. However, he threatened to kill her as well if she tried to call the police or notified anyone. McGill informed his then-wife that he wanted to experience what it would be like when she questioned him about why he had done it. McGill was found guilty in April 2021 and was given a minimum 14-year prison sentence. By the time his release is even being contemplated, he will be in his mid-70s. Martin, the son who discovered Mary's body, responded to the jury's decision by saying, "There is justice, and my mom can finally rest in peace." There is no joy at the verdict. Every member of the family has endured years of agony, thus relief is felt. He is an abhorrent person, and it is somewhat consoling to consider that the only place he will ever see is the inside of a prison. He also disclosed how and when he learned of McGill's detention. On December 4th, 2019, 2 police officers knocked on my home and stated they had an arrest and that the person was supposed to appear in court the next day. And that was all. It was quite the moment to hear the news after 35 years, though I never thought it would. I had always hoped it would. I just started crying because I was so stunned. It took more than 30 years for Mary McLaughlin to receive justice. Now that the monster that killed her is in prison, where he belongs, her family can rest a little easier at night. Moving on to the next case. Janet Brouchu. December 23, 1987 was the date. Janet, 20, was having a great time spending the evening with friends when something unexpected happened. Janet was asked to leave the T. Woody's bar even though she was barely of legal drinking age. Everyone else was let in. That evening, a man she'd met volunteered to take her home in his car. After that, she became ill in the parking lot, and he wouldn't let her get into his car. For more than 30 years, the details surrounding Janet's next events remained unknown until the identity of the assassin, who killed her on that crisp December evening, came to light. And, unfortunately, he wasn't the only one who brought about Janet's death. Janet was raised in Winslow, a little town on the Kennebec River in Maine. At the beginning of the 1980s, Winslow was home to only 8,000 people. It was a nice area to raise kids in a peaceful community. Geraldine and Albert Brouchu, Janet's adoptive parents, brought her up to be a joyful, intelligent young adult while also assisting her in controlling her diabetes. She required daily insulin shots, but Janet was in charge of the things that really mattered. Perhaps what motivated her to enter the area in the first place was her early experiences with her own health care. She was employed as a dietary assistant at the Seton campus of Maine General Medical Center as of late 1987. But Janet's thoughts were far from work that December evening. It was the ideal opportunity to catch up with old high school pals during their holiday vacation from college. Janet didn't get to see them too much. Less than a mile from Winslow, in the town of Waterville, they made their first visit at a neighborhood bowling alley. The companions started talking to two males in the next alleyway, while they took turns hurling the ball down the lane. After they had gotten along well enough to want to spend the rest of the evening together, they all went to T. Woody's restaurant and bar. With a fantastic view of the river, the bar was located on the concourse's lower level in Waterville. Janet was turned away when they arrived. Just 2 years earlier, Maine had raised its drinking age to 21. Janet now barely made the cut. All of her buddies wanted to continue the night because they were of legal age. As the odd one out, Janet needed a ride home, and coincidentally, one of the men they had met at the bowling alley occurred to be willing to provide it. Though the specifics of what transpired after are unclear, we do know a few things. The man who was meant to drive Janet home went back inside T. Woody's to get her purse, which she had left behind. Possibly because she wasn't allowed to go back in. Janet was throwing up when he got back to the parking lot. She might be experiencing it due to her diabetes, or because she had consumed alcohol earlier in the evening. It's also possible that she consumed something that upset her stomach. Then, the guy who was meant to drive her home wouldn't let her get into his car because he didn't want her becoming sick in it. Then she was gone. When Janet's parents awoke the following morning, they discovered she was gone. Geraldine and Albert reported her missing after trying in vain to locate her and calling around to see if she had remained at any of her friends' homes. A nationwide search was conducted, and news stations all throughout the nation carried reports of Janet's disappearance. The detectives assigned to discover Janet's fate turned over every stone. Regardless of the region in which the lead originated, they investigated every lead that was given to them. They even made an attempt to locate Janet by using her diabetes. They investigated insulin sales that might have been connected to Janet. Regretfully, despite their best efforts, they were never able to advance past square one. The days quickly stretched into weeks, and Janet was still nowhere to be found. It really did seem as though she had disappeared. The family of Janet attempted to cling to the hope that she would be returned home safely. Since her disappearance, they have been praying for a call from the police department with good news every heartbreaking day. Less than 3 months later, those aspirations were dashed. Finally, a call arrived, but it was the kind that no parent ever wants to get. A man named Christopher Anthony was checking on his hydropower station at Waverly Avenue Dam early on March 18, 1988. Then he made an awful discovery. A naked body was floating on the Sebasticook River. Christopher called the police, who arrived on the scene without delay. There were barricades along that stretch of river. We did a quick scan along the riverbank to see if anything noteworthy had been abandoned. To be looked at and identified, the body was brought to the coroner's office. They found there that Janet Brochu was the owner. The original investigation did not identify the reason of Janet's death, but it turned out that Janet had not been alive for very long after her final sighting at T. Woody's. A dedicated diving team was established on the Sylvester Cook River in the weeks that followed the discovery. They were searching for any of Janet's belongings or any proof that would indicate what had happened to her in the hours following her disappearance. The idea that Janet had fallen into the river that evening herself remained unruled by the investigators. The intersection of the Kennebec and Sebasticook rivers occurs not long from T. Woody's. She was abandoned in the parking lot, where it was chilly and dark. Perhaps Janet attempted to go home and, while crossing the bridge that led back to Winslow, she unintentionally slipped into the icy waters, not being able to get out before being critically cold. However, there was a significant issue with this theory. She was discovered wearing nothing on her body. It was improbable that Janet could have lost all she was wearing that evening to the water's current. What's more, Janet's body was discovered upstream of the river. This implied that she could not have fallen in while walking home and ended up in the location where she was discovered. Who, though, had placed Janet there if she hadn't fallen into the river? People in Maine started to worry if there was a serial killer out there as the mystery deepened. It was a direction the detectives had started to explore as well. On May 9, 1986, 17-year-old Kimberly Morrow disappeared from the hamlet of Jay, Maine, 1 hour distant. She was last observed that same day with a person she had met earlier. The police searched the entire state diligently, but they were unable to discover her whereabouts. Kimberly's case could not be connected to Janet's. Within 5 months of the discovery of Janet's body, another woman vanished without the investigators' knowledge. Furthermore, her case and Janet's shared a lot more parallels. Geraldine Finn, then 23 years old, was unwinding with 2 co-workers after work on August 9, 1988. She worked as a licensed nursing assistant at the Skowhegan Nursing Home. Pete and Larry's bar was located on Upper Main Street in Waterville. It just so happened to be that Janet's last known location, T. Woody's, was only 3 miles away. A stranger in a blue Chevy Blazer drove by the window where Geraldine and her co-workers were seated. He grabbed their interest and started waving the 3 young ladies outside. After doing so, they started to go to his car. Then he inquired if they would want to have a swim. But this was no benign request, exactly. The women discovered he was fully nude by the time they reached his rolled-down window. He asked if they might accompany him skinny dipping. They turned around and returned to the pub to finish their evening, perhaps feeling awkward about the exchange. Quite though it was not quite 8:30 p.m., the gang was eager to go out before returning home. It took a while for that same dude to show up at the bar dressed completely. He began speaking to Geraldine's group later in the evening. Perhaps he made some form of apology for their prior exchange. It's possible that he was attributing it to the fact that his garments were damp from his previous skinny dipping excursion. Geraldine's group was able to engage with him no matter what he said. Geraldine accepted the man's offer of a ride home at the end of the night since she felt comfortable enough with him. Geraldine was seated in the passenger seat of his Chevy the last time those buddies saw her. They had no idea that their friend would not live to see another day. The next day, she was reported missing. The man who was meant to drive her home that night was mentioned by her pals to the authorities. They talked about his unique mustache, diamond-shaped tattoo on his shoulder, and blue Chevy Blazer. 5 days after Geraldine vanished, on August 14, 1988, a guy strolling along Route 201 over the property made a horrifying find. A young woman's body lay in a forested location near the land he had been surveying. At first, the authorities didn't reveal much about the nature of the investigation, but they revealed 2 days later that it was Geraldine Finn's body. They realized that she had been killed. It was not an accidental death. Finding the man she had last been seen with was now her top priority. They would soon discover that he was Gerald Goodale, a 29-year-old man. In Waterville, Gerald Goodale performed a variety of construction works. Those who knew him intimately appeared astonished by the news when his name was mentioned in connection with Geraldine Finn's case. According to a family acquaintance, Goodale has always been willing to pitch in and help out wherever he could. In response to the news, Goodale's father said that nothing seemed to fit together. There was nothing his son could have done to harm Geraldine. He asserted that his son had a plan for that evening. According to Goodale's father, he stayed at home until 9:15 in order to await a call. He then proceeded to go mud running. It's clear that the detectives were wary of his father's statements. They were not going to believe a family member when they indicated that Goodale resembled the man who was last seen with Geraldine, according to the co-workers who were with her that evening. On August 15th, the police started monitoring Goodale before taking action to take him into custody. After being placed under arrest, he was accused of killing Geraldine Finn. Reporters started drawing attention to potential similarities between Geraldine and Janet's cases as soon as the news leaked. The two young ladies shared a similar age. They were all employed in the medical field, and their last known locations were Waterville after a fun-filled evening spent with pals. They were all last seen in the parking lots of two bars that were about 3 miles apart. There were also some parallels between the places where their remains were discovered. The setting was rural and isolated, despite the fact that Janet was discovered in the water. This had also applied to Geraldine's body's position. However, there was something much more worrisome. Goodale had told a family member that he had seen Janet Brochu the night before she was last seen in the T. Woody's parking lot. Given that Goodale had never provided the authorities with this information despite their repeated requests, that immediately connected him to the crime. Goodale showed up in court on September 3rd for his bond hearing. The state made the argument that he should be detained until his trial the following year because he posed a threat to society. The state called multiple witnesses to testify in order to bolster its position. They disclosed that in the weeks after Janet vanished, Goodale had been questioned about her case. After effectively establishing their case, Goodale was returned to custody in anticipation of his trial in May 1989. The prosecution felt sure they would secure a conviction when the time came. They had witness testimony pointing out that Goodale had been suspiciously acting earlier in the evening and that he was the last person seen with Geraldine, but they didn't even have to show that he was at fault. Goodale acknowledged the offense, but he also requested a less punishment. He claimed that his actions were not planned. Geraldine fled from Goodale, and he said that in a panic, he killed her. However, the prosecution did not want to give him a lighter term. They believed he posed a major risk and should be detained for as long as possible. Even when a judge found him guilty of the charges, Goodale had one more trick up his sleeve to try to shorten his prison sentence. The most crucial detail of all was that he admitted to investigators that he had some knowledge of Janet Barich's case. He asserted that he was aware of the offender. Goodale, though, was hardly cooperative. Oddly enough, Goodale was never formally identified as a suspect in the case even after this. Goodale received a sentence of 75 years in prison, with a release date of 2,033 years at his sentencing. After that, the years started to go by. Janet's family was soon ringing in the new century without any updates regarding her case. It was 30 years before there was an update. The announcement was made in 2019, the 32nd anniversary of Janet's disappearance, that a cold case team will reopen the investigation into her death. Even though her father and mother were no longer here to receive this good news, other family members and longtime acquaintances were filled with renewed hope that Janet's killer would be found and punished, even after all these years. Then, on May 14, 2021, the day that everyone had been looking forward to, a prisoner at Maine State Penitentiary was taken into custody. It was Gerald Goodale, that's for sure. However, what had caused this upgrade in a case that had remained stagnant for such a long time? It was DNA, as some of you may have previously surmised. In response to the news, State Police Chief John Coate stated that this case is the result of years' worth of collaborative work by prosecutors, detectives, and trained scientists from the state, local, and county governments. These individuals never gave up on finding the truth or pursuing justice for the victim, her family, and friends. Goodale, who is currently in his early 60s, received a 32.5-year sentence extension in March 2023 for the actions he took against Janet Baratiel. Goodale entered a guilty plea to the allegations brought against him after realizing the writing was on the wall and choosing not to attempt to refute his role. Other family members gathered to finally get justice for the life lost so young, even though her parents were unable to attend the court proceedings that day. Daniel, her cousin, described her as a sweet girl, just like the rest of us, young and dumb. For all those years, Janet's family would find some little comfort in knowing that the person who killed her had not been living his life. Despite it not being for her case, he had been serving time. The specifics of what transpired that evening have not been made public. Gerald Goodale will definitely carry some secrets with him into eternity. Moving on to the next case. Sarah Inwood. 12-year-old Sarah Inwood left her Frankfort, Pennsylvania, home on Heckerham Road on August 18, 1993, to go to her neighborhood church. Roberts Road and Grafenberg Road in Sequoia are home to Norwich Corners Church. This was less than a mile from Sarah's family home where she attended summer Bible school. The young girl gathered some poster board, an 8x10-inch plastic transparencies, and a church songbook at the church. She then turned around to head back home. About 4/10 of a mile from her home, Sarah was last seen riding her pink and white 10-speed mountain bike out of the church, down Roberts Road, and up the steep slope on Heckerham Road. Sarah never made it home, even though it was so close, and she was never seen again. When friends, relatives, and law enforcement looked for the missing girl later that evening, they discovered something in the brush. The items Sarah was last seen with were strewn erratically around the ground, along with her unique pink and white bike that had been neatly propped up against a tree. 100 feet separated the goods from Heckerham Road. The inquiry into Sarah's disappearance appears to have been short-lived, as a 45-year-old former janitor named Lewis Lent Jr. admitted to kidnapping and killing the 12-year-old child just 3 years later. After being found guilty in 1995 of kidnapping, larceny, assault with a dangerous weapon, and assault and battery in connection with his earlier attempt to kidnap a 12-year-old girl in Massachusetts, Lent was already serving his sentence in prison. While incarcerated, Lent admitted to killing 2 children. James Bernardo, then 12 years old, is said to have been the first victim of Lent. He vanished from a Pittsfield, Massachusetts, theater on October 22, 1990. Lent met James when he was working at the theater and was walking outdoors at the time. He coerced James into accompanying him by threatening and using a knife. Once in his apartment, he stripped the little child of his clothes, taped him to his bed, and physically abused him. Then he hanged James to death. James was discovered dead in Newfield, New York. It was near Lent's childhood home, even though it was distant from the scene of the kidnapping. Lent was not regarded as a suspect or a person of interest at the time of the crime. In his second confession, Lent acknowledged that he had kidnapped and killed Sarah Wood. He stated that he had found the young girl while searching for a victim, and he forced her into his van with a knife once more. After binding Sarah's hands, he took her upstate into the Adirondack Mountains, where he sexually assaulted her and ultimately killed her with a big tree branch. He never did check to see if she was still breathing before burying her body. "I dislike touching dead bodies," to quote. Having brought the necessary equipment to bury the body, he had arrived to the mountain range. Lent first claimed to have buried Sarah's body in an Adirondack mountain area close to Roquette Lake after coming clean. He later provided officials with a map showing the burial site, which was in or near the town of Inlet, New York. Searches conducted in the area, however, turned up no leads regarding Sarah's location. Lentz then acknowledged that she wasn't actually present. Subsequently, he declined to provide law authorities with the location of the remains and asserted that he had interred her body with another victim he wished to keep hidden. Lent later took back his admissions, but it was too late. He was found guilty of kidnapping Sarah Woods and killing James Bernardo. He admitted to killing James Lusher, a 16-year-old, in 2013. In 1992, James Lusher disappeared from Westfield, Massachusetts. Since Lent was already serving a life sentence, the authorities decided not to press charges, although they did search Greenwater Pond for his remains. But after a 3-day search, no signs of James could be found in the vicinity. Despite Lynn's conviction for 2 murders, there remains a great deal of discussion and conjecture about his confessions. He asserted that he occasionally experienced memory loss and blackouts. Additionally, he claimed in a related press article that this was because of his close experience with the UFO in 1974. This would imply that Lynn suffers from mental health problems, which would distort his admissions. There have also been theories suggesting that Lynn had an accomplice who is still at large and that he did not act alone. Nobody has ever located Sarah's body. Her case was also revisited in 2015. Even after the conviction, her case is still pending resolution. Currently incarcerated for life at the Colony Correctional Facility in Bridgewater, Massachusetts, is Lynn. The Sarah and Wood Rescue Center was established by Sarah's family following her disappearance. It was subsequently renamed the Mohawk Valley branch of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. In addition, her narrative encouraged a small group of cyclists, led by her father Robert and elder brother Dusty, to ride from Utica, New York to the U.S. Capitol wearing teal and pink jerseys in an effort to raise awareness of her case and the Mohawk Valley office of the NCMEC. Thousands of bikers now take part in the annual event, which raises money for the NCMEC and sheds light on Sarah's case, as well as the cases of 100 other missing children nationwide. They now wear purple for the police officers involved in these cases, and white to represent all the children who have gone missing. On August 18, 1993, 12-year-old Sarah and Wood was last observed cycling up a steep hill on Hackerdam Road in the New York town of Frankfort. At the time of her disappearance, she was just 5 feet tall and cost £1.96. She was last seen with a headband, brown sandals, turquoise shorts, and a pink t-shirt with "Guess Who" embroidered across the front. She might have been holding 4 keys, a fluorescent green and white keychain with a silver ring, and prescription tortoiseshell eyeglasses. Sarah is a Caucasian girl with scars on both of her legs, brown hair, and blue eyes. She has dimples in her cheeks and is missing 1 toe on each foot. Her hair was shoulder length when she vanished, and she also had freckles on her face. Her name is spelled, and without the E, by certain agencies. Although foul play is suspected in her case, she will be 40 years old if she survives. If you're fascinated by true crime and enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up to stay updated on all our latest content. Kelly and Workman. Everyone knew who the criminals were when Kelly and Workman was discovered, yet it took 35 years for someone to come forward and dare accuse the bullies responsible. Stanley and Joan Workman, farmers, welcomed Kelly and into the world in 1965. They lived in Seymour, Missouri's Douglas County. Stanley spent 19 years working at Daco Corporate, but his true passion was farming and taking care of his dairy herd. Mark and Pam Workman were Kelly's 2 siblings. Ames, her infant brother, Matthew Workman, died at a young age. She was a peaceful, well-mannered kid who lived with her parents. She had blonde hair and green eyes. Kelly frequently performed garden and house maintenance for local Dogwood residents. For around 3 years, she manicured the Dogwood Cemetery's lawn. In this region, it was not unusual for a young lady to take care of a cemetery and for her to work late into the night. She was not afraid of the graveyard. However, it turned into a nightmare for her family on June 30th, 1989, when Kelly just vanished while working late into the night. Kelly's parents thought she was running a bit late at first, but as supper time drew near and she was unable to be found, they started to get worried. Their daughter was not usually out this late without warning. Shauna Beebe, Kelly's cousin, recalls that day very clearly when Joan Workman hurried to their house in a panic, alerting Kelly's uncle and father of her disappearance. The days that followed were characterized by an intensely emotional and chaotic event. Family and friends came together, organizing search teams and clinging to hope as each hour went by. Their concern turned into worry, and they called the police. A massive search that covered Douglas County started. Kelly's last known sighting was at 5:40 p.m. while she was cutting the lawn at Douglas County's Dogwood Cemetery. This is close to her place of employment, the Southern Baptist Church. At the intersection of Z and Highway 14, her uncle saw her working diligently, but by 6:15, he was unable to see her anymore, so she either departed or was taken somewhere else. Kelly's sister Pam Workman lived roughly 200 miles away in Kansas City, Missouri at the time. The 22-year-old was going about her day. She was unable to fathom the catastrophe that would befall her family. A knock on Pam's flat door on July 1st disturbed her morning routine. Her aunt and uncle were standing there, worried expressions on their faces. They brought the breaking news that Kelly was missing, which would change Pam's life irrevocably. Even though Pam's travel back to Douglas County wasn't very long, it seemed to go on forever. Every mile served as an agonizing reminder of her sister's absence and the family's impending uncertainty. The laborer family gathered in prayer and concern for Kelly's whereabouts for several days. The fact that barely 2/3 of the lawn had been mowed and Kelly's keys were in the ignition of the car was the most perplexing thing. The lawnmower was switched off, but still fully fueled. She was interrupted, the detectives concluded, and was not to be robbed. It's possible she was abducted. Heartbreak overwhelmed the relief when Kelly was eventually located. Sadly for Kelly's family, a week after her kidnapping, her body was found. Kelly was 24 years old. Over 10 miles after her last sighting, in the Mark Twain National Forest near Oldfield, her body was found submerged in a creek. For two of Kelly's uncles who were present at the moment, the revelation was especially terrifying. Authorities were unable to pinpoint the precise cause of her death because of the speed at which her body decomposed. After taking an X-ray of her, they discovered no signs of a head injury or bullet wounds. They surmised that she had probably passed away on the evening of June 30th or July 1st. AM often believed that her sister's case did not receive the attention it required. Her grief and annoyance were further exacerbated by this feeling of neglect. Still, optimism lingered. Pam held fast to the hope that justice would eventually be done, not just for Kelly, but for all the families that suffer because of a cold case. Pam was adamant that Kelly was a victim of excessive knowledge. She may have heard something regarding money or illegal substances while working at Dogwood store on certain days. This also provides motive. The offender felt compelled to silence her. Although Pam feels that the police did not do much, there was another issue with the investigation. They lacked the means to prosecute the three suspects they had. They provided alibis during the interrogation. During a conference on July 10, 1989, law enforcement officials acknowledged that they lacked physical leads in this case. Participants in the conference included members from the Missouri State Highway Patrol Springfield and Willow Springs offices, as well as the sheriff's departments of Christian County and Douglas County. They just did not have enough evidence, even with all their resources together. The laborers openly called on people to take action and pleaded with any witnesses to come forward. On July 13, 1989, they made a $10,000 incentive offer. When Kelly went missing, they had first offered it, but now they were asking people to come forward with knowledge about what had happened to her tragically. For months into the investigation, on October 20th, the Douglas County Sheriff acknowledged that not much had changed. The department eliminated circumstances, evidence, and suspects as it carried out its inquiry. On the case, they possessed nothing. When the Workmans made a tiny progress, they felt hope. On December 30th, 1989, Joan Workman, Kelly's mother, was sporadically reviewing the day's events with her family. She received a crucial piece of information from a friend or member of another family that they had either forgotten or failed to disclose. For days after Kelly was kidnapped, a friend of Kelly's contacted to report that they had seen a man at the Workman's house the afternoon Kelly vanished. Unfortunately, neither the witness nor the intruder was identified, but at least it indicated that someone had witnessed something. This was a really interesting turn of events. Due to threats and coercion, this person never reported anything to the police. Kelly was most likely someone Kelly knew well, since Jones firmly felt that if the offender had been a stranger, Kelly would have fought back. However, the months soon became a year. Another statement was published by the sheriff's office. They were sure that Kelly's case would be resolved, since there was someone out there who had vital information. Leonard Dwight Banks and Bobby Lee Banks, the notorious Banks brothers of the area, were the prime suspects. Bobby Lee Banks was given a polygraph test in August 1990 at the Missouri State Highway Patrol's request. It should come as no surprise that he failed the exam, which his lawyer said was caused by a lack of feeling. Their lawyer advised them not to make any public statements at the time because of the intense media attention. The police also requested that his brother, Dwight Banks, submit to a polygraph examination. The brothers lived in Seymour and had been seen about town. Dwight consented to take the polygraph exam, during which the researcher asked him 3 key questions. First of all, did he murder Kelly and Workman? Does he then know who killed her? Finally, did he appear to be under the effect of illicit substances? Unlike his brother, Dwight said no to every inquiry, and the examiner concluded that he was telling the truth. Additionally, the police learned that on the day Kelly vanished, a young male was spotted in the cemetery. Later in the day, the burned-out truck belonged to this man. This man was probably involved, and his friends burned the truck and threatened him. For a while, everything was silent. 2 years later, in October 1992, Joan received a call from an elderly person who identified herself as a lady. This person thought Kelly Ann's death was related to the woman and her partner, a licensed narcotic dealer. The caller's name was never discovered, and the woman and her boyfriend had alibis. Thus, this seeming lead was meaningless. However, in the interim, White's former partner revealed that he had requested her to provide an alibi on the night Kelly Ann died. Authorities were still in the dark 6 years after Kelly and Workman's decomposing body was found. According to Christian County Sheriff Steve Whitney, there were no findings from a grand jury probe. Stanley Workman, Kelly's father, thought more than one person was involved in her kidnapping and murder, but he had no evidence. When a fresh lead surfaced in the middle of July 1995, the investigation was reopened. Sheriff Whitney hinted that he had suspects, but he would not elaborate. Whitney underlined the difficulty of assembling a strong case, despite his confidence in knowing the identity of the attacker. Another interesting lead emerged as the investigation went on. Additionally, Bobby and Dwight Banks were named as suspects in Kelly's murder by July 1996. Kelly was working at the Dogwood store a few hours before she was abducted, as Dwight Banks had admitted to seeing her with his brother Bobby. However, he claimed that neither his brother nor he was involved in our tragedy or the kidnapping. Actually, he and Bob were having fried chicken at his house when she had vanished. Investigators had good grounds to suspect that Dwight had used illegal drugs, like Valium or relaxants, to help him pass the polygraph exam that his brother had failed. While Kelly's case was going through all of this, on July 16, 1996, a bomb was discovered at the Workman's residence. The explosive was defused by police, the Jefferson City Bomb Squad, and officers from both counties. On Joan's car's hood was where the explosive was discovered. It was found at 5:30 a.m. with a menacing writing on it. When the squad set the bomb's timer off at midday, they discovered no explosive materials. It was just supposed to frighten the family. Rita Sanders, a 17-year law enforcement veteran, thought she knew who killed Kelly and Workman. They assisted in disposing of the body. 2 were from Seymour, and the 3rd was from a rural area near Fordland. She mentioned that just before Kelly vanished, 2 suspects were spotted close to the crime scene. Rita thought they had the case solved, but time and manipulated evidence made her dubious they would ever face justice. Remarkably, Rita was let go from the force in that same year. Rita informed the laborers that as Kelly valiantly struggled for her life, a witness observed her being violently placed into a pickup. When a man from Ava came forward and admitted to the crime in December 1998, things really got going. He also named 2 other males as suspects, but no one was taken into custody. Wiley Belt was an accomplice and witness. DNA testing warrants were served to Dwight Banks in Seymour and Wiley Belt in Fordland on June 9, 1999, in relation to Kelly and Workman's death. However, neither guy was charged or detained, and the test results were never made public. In an interview, Wiley Belt said he didn't know the Banks brothers and that he wasn't terrified of the testing. He claimed that since he saw Kelly at the dogwood store that day, someone must have noticed him there. Thus, the case was forgotten for many years. No fresh leads were available. A few of the cops who were involved retired, and the photographic proof was destroyed. While grocery shopping, Kelly's sister Pam once ran into Dwight Banks. He wanted to get into a fight with her because it was a bad experience. Kelly and Workman's case was given to investigators Christopher Holland and Leslie Albrecht in 2021. The case has long been regarded as open. The two were employed by the Senior Services Bureau of Special Investigations and the Department of Health at the time. In Southwest Missouri, they were given caseloads related to dependent adult abuse and elder abuse. Albrecht and Holland did not have a meeting with the eyewitnesses until the second year of their investigation. In the end, they contributed vital information that strengthened the case against Belt and Bank brothers. Soon after this information was made public, an indictment was filed. However, Stanley Workman died on September 11, 2022, before he could witness the offenders being brought to justice. A Douglas County grand jury indicted Leonard Dwight Banks of Gainesville, 64, and Bobby Banks, 65, on February 20, 2024. Furthermore, Ava's 64-year-old Wiley Belt is responsible for Kelly and Workman's 1989 murder, assault, and kidnapping. Each of the men had a $250,000 cash bail that kept them detained at the Douglas County Jail. At their arraignments, the three men entered not guilty pleas. Attorneys attempted to persuade the court to grant Dwight Banks some mercy in light of his diabetes and pancreatic cancer struggles. Since all three of the charges are first-degree offenses, the maximum sentence for each is life in prison. Moving on to the next case. Felicia McGuire. On October 7, 2007, 32-year-old Felicia McGuire disappeared, leaving her friends and family in shock. The last place witnesses saw her alive was in the Dorchester neighborhood of Boston. The police conducted extensive investigations and large-scale searches. She was never found, though. Her disappearance occurred under odd circumstances, and the police were notified of suspicious activities involving a person of interest. However, the investigation was quickly concluded, leaving Felicia's loved ones without any closure. Welcome back to Mystery Detective, the place where mysteries remain unanswered. We want to look at Felicia McGuire's mysterious disappearance today. It took 15 years for this case to be resolved, and justice was finally served in 2023. Before we go any further, if you're new to the channel or haven't subscribed yet, do so. Your support will motivate us to keep creating films for you like this one. That stated, without further ado, let's get straight into this mystery. The southern part of the city is home to the Dorchester neighborhood in Boston, Massachusetts. Almost 6 square miles make up the entire land area, making it the largest neighborhood in Boston. In Dorchester, there are more than 90,000 residents of many ethnic backgrounds, such as African Americans, Vietnamese Americans, Caribbean Americans, and Irish Americans. The Boston neighborhood of Dorchester is now growing quickly due to new residential and commercial building. This is the region in which the case under review occurs. Felicia McGuire was born in the charming city of Dorchester in 1975. It is unknown who her father is, although Sharon McGuire was her mother when she was growing up. Felicia grew up in a happy, loving, and humorous home during her early years. In 1997, she gave birth to her lone child, Nicholas Fahey. Nicholas became the center of her existence with the birth of her son. Nicholas's father's identity and the circumstances surrounding his death were unclear. Felicia was never away from Dorchester. Despite the challenges and setbacks life threw at her, she stayed there with her beloved kid and her mother, creating a happy and caring household. Felicia had a romantic involvement with a man named David Pena over time. She and him were also housemates. Felicia was a single parent, but it didn't stop her from being devoted to her child's well-being. She worked non-stop to provide her child with the best life imaginable. She went above and above to provide her son the support and care he needed. Felicia McGuire was a selfless and caring mother who put her child's needs ahead of her own. The difficulties in life never broke her spirit. Unfortunately, on October 7, 2007, Felicia McGuire vanished without a trace, ending her mother's hopes and dreams of seeing her kid succeed and become a wonderful member of society. The 32-year-old loving mother was last observed in the Dorchester neighborhood of Boston, Massachusetts, where she resided. She was last seen on Rixton Street going about her business, but no one knows what happened to her. Felicia's mother, Sharon, was horrified to learn that her daughter had vanished. And things got worse when it became unclear where Felicia was. She searched through phone books and any possible contact she could think of, but her efforts were in vain. Felicia's friends and family worried more and more as the days went by because she never spoke with them. On October 18, 2007, after a 10-day period, Sharon McGuire formally reported her daughter missing. Her disappearance prompted the Boston Police Department to launch an inquiry right away. They quickly discovered that Felicia had stopped talking to her cherished son and other family members, and that her behavior was abnormal. This made others wonder if she had been the victim of a horrific crime. Felicia's family was quite worried about her safety and well-being, because it was not in her nature to disappear without anyone. They pondered what had happened to her and where she could be. The residual uncertainty concerning her destiny had to be faced by her son and family. Law enforcement officials worked very hard as the inquiry went on to try to uncover any information that would lead them to the answer. To put together a timeline of Felicia's last known movements, police spoke with neighbors, acquaintances, and family members. The neighborhood, including any nearby woods and bodies of water, was thoroughly searched in an attempt to locate the missing woman. As the days grew into weeks, and those weeks into months, Felicia's family grew increasingly concerned. Their constant concern was the whereabouts of their beloved mother and daughter. Her disappearance also disturbed the Boston Police Department. In November 2013, they shared images of Felicia McGuire on social media in an attempt to gather any information that might help return her home safely due to the lack of information. In the social media posts, they provided a detailed description of her. The police highlighted her personal attributes, such as her height, weight, hair color, and eye color, and expressed serious concerns for her safety and well-being. Felicia was a beautiful woman with piercing, vibrant eyes and chestnut brown hair. She had a medium frame, weighing about 140 pounds, and stood slender at 5 feet 2 inches. Felicia had been absent for over 6 arduous years, and the mystery surrounding her disappearance became more intricate with every passing day. Her body had never been found, even after a great deal of time and money had been spent looking for leads. Nevertheless, a number of witnesses' accounts of Felicia's disappearance remained doubtful after the 2013 Facebook post. The police were informed by an unidentified witness that David Pina, Felicia McGuire's live-in lover, showed up at his door early on October 7, 2007, seeking for a trip to his mother's Devon Street home. The witness claimed to have lived below Pina and Felicia's flat. Blood on his clothes was observed by the neighbor. However, Pina had stated at the time that Felicia had stabbed him with scissors. Still, the blood on Pina's shirt hinted at much more horrific events. The witness stated that Pina told him that he had violently shoved Felicia against the wall during their altercation, causing her head to hit the bed or dresser. Subsequently, Pina expressed uncertainty about her survival and appeared indifferent to her destiny. Pina was still being observed by the witness. He said that Pina had swelling in her right hand as well. Pina replied that Felicia had struck him with a baseball bat when asked why. A few days later, 2 other witnesses claimed to have seen Pina come back to the flat that same evening. They said that day, about 3 or 4 in the morning, Payne came home with another man and went upstairs. They reappeared after a while, hauling down the stairs a blanket that might have held Felicia McGuire's body. When the 2 witnesses tried to help, they were ordered to mind their own business and turned away. To further cloud the picture, a second witness stated that in 2007, he had lent Pena his 2005 Chevy Impala in return for drugs, and that year he had returned it with the back seat completely cleaned and broken. These unsettling clues cast doubt on what truly happened to Felicia McGuire and prompted the authorities to suspect David Pena as the investigation progressed. Investigators questioned David Pina about the matter right away. They also learned that he and Felicia had a turbulent past. Pina informed detectives that, during Felicia McGuire's disappearance, he was her live-in lover, and that their relationship was anything from simple. The police questioned Pina since he had previously told the first witness who had called in that he and Felicia had gotten into a violent brawl at their flat. Then he acknowledged that Felicia had stabbed him in the shoulder when she assaulted him with a pair of scissors. In response, Pina fled the flat to seek refuge at his mother's place. However, upon returning a few days later, he discovered something unexpected. Felicia was gone, and her possessions had been pilfered. Because Pina did not provide any damning statements, and there was no evidence against him during the interrogation, the detectives were compelled to release Pina. After that, Felicia's death inquiry became a tortuous trip with many twists and turns that ultimately led to every conceivable dead end. Every lead was followed up on, every piece of evidence was scrutinized, yet the case got colder by the day. Felicia's friends and family were in unbearable pain and were in desperate need of an explanation for her disappearance. The beloved mother Felicia McGuire vanished in 2007, and her whereabouts have been the subject of speculation and rumors for years. New optimism was sparked in 2017 when the FBI searched a highly forested region of West Roxbury. Days of covert investigation were followed by no information being given to the media, leaving people to wonder what had led the officials to that spot. In the end, the truth was revealed. In fact, the search was connected to Felicia's disappearance, and the investigation was a crucial step in the lengthy process of discovering the truth. During the search, a witness came forward and shockingly revealed to the detectives that in 2007 David Pina had asked for help getting things out of his flat, including a bulky rolled-up carpet. He continued by saying that before sped off, Pina and his accomplice had put Felicia's body in the trunk of a car. This was witnessed by someone who said that he suspected right away that a body was wrapped in the blanket and carpet. Sadly, his presumptions were correct. Pina was eventually able to bring Felicia's body into a wooded location with a parking lot, where they dumped Felicia's body with the witness's help. The only thing standing in the way of the investigators finishing the case was locating Felicia's body's disposal site. Nevertheless, despite multiple leads and witnesses, the answer to this seemed to be a mystery that would never be solved. The witness left the area before finding out what had happened to her remains. The witness's lack of knowledge of Boston made matters worse, since she was unable to provide any ideas as to where the body might have been disposed of. McGuire's family and loved ones had been given a frustratingly inadequate picture of the crime, and the prosecutor was unable to bring them closure. A few years later, on January 14th, 2023, David Pina was apprehended at the Baker County Detention Center in Florida by the Boston Police Department's fugitive team. Pina had an outstanding warrant from Suffolk Superior Court for cocaine trafficking, and he was wanted by Dorchester District Court on a murder charge pertaining to Felicia's case. More than 15 years ago, Felicia vanished from Roxton Street in Dorchester, leaving her little boy behind. Because of Pina's arrest, her family and friends who have been searching for her for a long time might now finally have some answers. Pina appeared in court on February 15, 2023, to be arraigned on the charges brought against him. The case has garnered national attention after more than 15 years of uncertainty and suffering, and this most recent breakthrough has reignited hopes of finding Felicia's remains. There is now some hope for Felicia McGuire's family. Police have grounds to think that her remains are still someplace in the Boston area, even though her corpse was never found. With the announcement of an arrest, an investigation that had been unresolved for some time has now received some closure. Though it was unable to bring their beloved Felicia back, Felicia's family and friends may finally rest easy knowing that someone will be held accountable for her terrible abduction. Eventually, we trust, justice shall be served. Pina is due to appear in court and is probably going to stand trial shortly. During this difficult time, our condolences and thoughts are with Felicia's friends and family. We can only pray that they find some comfort and peace as they continue to heal from this unfathomable catastrophe. If you're fascinated by true crime and enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up to stay updated on all our latest content. Thanks for watching.
you.